Afternoon, everyone. That is a bad one. So, following on from Ian's talk, I'm going to talk a little bit more about space technology more generally. And I want to start, if James is happy to press the right buttons, by looking at a picture that we're all familiar with. But this is actually a system that was developed by a student, somebody potentially like what we're seeing down in the tech jam, to monitor space debris. So you'll see this blue dot. You probably know all these off by heart. That's a spent rocket. There are some red dots flying around. You may be able to see these grey dots flying around. That's space debris. It's rubbish in space. And if we start to zoom out from that, you'll see that whilst there aren't anything flying over us at the moment, the grey stuff we don't want, there's an awful lot of it. So before we start to think about putting more stuff into space, we certainly need to get our act together and think about cleaning up what's already in space. And there's some really interesting technologies being developed about how to capture that and dispose of it in a really appropriate and sustainable way. I also want to have a talk about some of the trends that we'll see in maybe probably decades, but there's some real exciting innovation going on at the moment in terms of manufacturing in space. So rather than launching, which is a costly exercise, launching satellites and products and equipment into space, why not actually go and mine asteroids for the metals and manufacture it in space using 3D printing, for example? And why not, while we're at it, mine the asteroids for water to refuel some of the satellites? So there's some really interesting technology developments there. As far as I know, we can't manufacture people in space yet, although I am assured that there's a couple who've been given special permission on the International Space Station to try. But at the moment, we have to take them up there. I don't know whether you've sort of followed all the policy work that's been going on around space, but UK Space Agency has been very clear about its position and where it'd like to see the UK going forwards. We know that we're going to need about 100,000 jobs to be created and filled in space by 2030. And just to give you a flavour, in Cornwall at the moment, there are around 50 businesses in the space sector. And that will come as a huge surprise to some, because actually we tend to think about the 4 or 5 businesses that are actually doing the hard technology, the actual satellite side of things. But there are another 40 odd businesses who are using data derived for space in applications that is then driving the demand for the satellite launch in the first place. So we've got 50 businesses employing about 250 staff, which is great, but we'd like to see that grow to around 1,000 jobs in Cornwall by 2025. There have been significant investments, as Ian alluded to. If any of you are interested in finding out a little bit more about that, there's a booklet floating around, grab a copy today, on the Human-Centred Space Action Plan, which covers a lot of what we're all interested in working on at the moment, but also over the next few years. So please do grab a copy of that. I'd also like to have a little look at some of the other technology that's being developed. You may not be able to tell from that, although some of you will know. This is a company called Effective Space who have created a drone which actually attaches onto a satellite to extend the life of that satellite. Lots of satellites up in space, when they were originally launched, had a sort of 15-year life cycle. They've been up there a long time. They're tired. They need a little help now. They can't keep themselves in orbit, so when the guys at Goonhilly, for example, are trying to remaneuver those satellites, they're exhausted. So these drones attach on and effectively reposition them so that they can stay in space for longer. And that's great because Cornwall has got a really strong ambition to develop its unmanned systems or drone capability. On the aerospace side of things, we've got a really unique proposition situated off the coast of Newquay, but there's an airspace there that runs across to the south coast of Ireland. It's a military airspace that we have permission to use for drone test and develop and manufacturers. And that can give them beyond visual line of sight capability. So there's some really interesting overlap between aerospace and space. The aerospace side of things across the southwest is really strong, one of the most capable clusters in the world. In Cornwall, is that you're telling me, Ian? Yeah. We've got, again, across the southwest, about 800 businesses that form part of that supply chain. About 80 of those are based in Cornwall, but we only have the job side of it at about 0.1% of the total number of jobs across the southwest. So I think we could be doing more. In terms of the spaceport conversation Ian alluded to earlier, just show of hands who's been following the spaceport conversation. Okay, most. If you've not, speak to Ross, who'll wave his hand now. He's your go-to guy on spaceport and can answer all those really tricky questions about when will we hear. But again, UK Space Agency have been very clear that they want to create launch capabilities in the UK to make the UK a European hub for the small satellites that we're seeing going up in these constellations now. And Nuki is very much positioning itself as the horizontal launch facility for the UK. So this is very exciting, fun, but what's it got to do with you guys? Well, once we've launched people, satellites, Elon Musk has launched his cars into space, we need to communicate with them, we need to control them, and we need to use the data that they are collecting in a meaningful way. So in terms of software, we are going to need mission control development developers, satellite integration and test engineers. We're going to need simulation designers with expertise in robotics, in artificial intelligence, and systems engineers. So some of those things I know we've got covered in the audience today. And if we can have a look at the next slide, if you recognise what you do on this, it's highly likely you could add value to the space sector. This is NASA's categorisation of the over 1,000 different software programs that they've developed. And you'll see in here, I'd be very surprised if a lot of the businesses we're in don't fit in some way into this. So all of you could add value to the space sector potentially. That's where we come in. I oversee a program called AeroSpace Cornwall, and that promotes and supports research, development and innovation in the aerospace and space sectors across Cornwall. We're particularly interested in unmanned aerial vehicles and systems, as we spoke about earlier, but also digital technologies. All of aerospace and space is underpinned by engineering and software, so we're interested in embedded software and using satellite data for communications, Earth observation, navigation and meteorology, which I know Catherine's going to speak on a little bit more after this talk. But this includes a really strong emphasis for us on artificial intelligence technologies and machine learning for data processing analysis. Again, something that I think a lot of you know a bit about, so if you do, come and talk to us. If you take the example now where satellite imagery is being used in all sorts of different applications, I know working with in former life at Exeter, universities are now using that data derived from imagery captured in satellite activities to monitor the wildebeest migration in the Serengeti. So rather than flying a light aircraft over and monitoring that way, but they need to know the difference between a wildebeest and a big rock. And somebody therefore needs to develop all the algorithms and interpret the data of that. So really strong interest there. Peter's in the room at the back. This is Peter. Most of you have to turn around because it's the guy in the pink shirt. So if you have ideas or little sparks from maybe what I've talked about today, but you don't have the expertise, the technology or the facilities to actually take those ideas forwards, we can help. We've got fully funded £5,000 innovation vouchers, which Peter looks after, and I'm sure would be happy to sign some of those off before he leaves today. But that's to help you take your business forwards in the space sector or the aerospace sector. You might want to use that, for example, I know the Satellite Applications Catapult have a program called Sprint, and it's really focused over a 5-day program on helping take your, what might just be a germ of an idea, right the way from concept through to feasibility. It'll give you a good interrogation and test it. It'll give you some assumptions and models that you might want to use, so that when you go and talk to people who might want to invest in that or future customers, you know you've got a really compelling proposition. If your ideas are more developed than that, and you'd actually like to do some R&D in this area, Peter's also got £1.3 million of grant funding, so you might want to speak to him about that. He'll be floating around as well in the come and have a chat with us sessions that are running through this afternoon, so please go and speak to him. We also offer access to the right networks, so there's lots of regional and national networks and access to the supply chain across the southwest. We're members of UK Space and we're members as SMEs for your benefit, so please use that. Come and speak to us how much you might want to engage with that. We can also fund, if any of you are interested in going to international trade shows to try and engage with future customers. If it's around aerospace and space, who can pay for your travel and tickets and exhibition costs, so it's a kind of a chat with us. And James, who's on the front seat being a navigator in terms of the tech. His focus is on working to create new collaborations with international investors, national investors who may want to work with you. And that's really to ensure that there's a sustainable source of funding coming in to all the things that you want to work on. So if you want to engage with space or aerospace, come and speak to James and I. If you actually want some cash, come and speak to Peter. Thank you very much.